Hello and welcome once again to Intro to Computer Games and Simulations here at Lorain County Community College. I am Mike Substelny, your instructor for this semester. And this week we've got a lot of material to cover. We're going to be talking about social and mobile games a little bit. And there's a whole lot to discuss that is not covered in your textbook. So we're going to be reading some online articles in addition to this lecture. Let's get started, because we have so much to do. Okay, recap of last time. We talked about games being comprised of objects, and objects had properties such as the position they might be in on a map or on a game board. They had behaviors, the changes that could possibly be made by those objects in their properties. They had relationships to each other, the way they affected each other in their positions, physical positions, or strengths, or whatever. We talked also about emergence in games, the things that were expected or not expected that came out of the very simple rules in games, complex behaviors coming from simple rules. All right, let's talk about some shocking headlines for game developers over the last few years, such as Real Networks closing its internal game studio, or Radical Entertainment cutting its staff by 50%, or Simbin filing for bankruptcy, or THQ files Chapter 11 and sells 4 of its studios. But there have been positive headlines as well. Zynga getting $180 million from a single investor, or Microsoft offering $200 million for CrowdStar, or Playfish, a $200 million deal. And the news that U.S. social gaming market was to grow by $1 billion. And then we've gotten more confusing news. We're all over the place. Investors started abandoning social games. OnLive liquidated for just $4.8 million. Zynga shares plummeted 75% 2 years ago. They're still around though. And yet, the Entertainment Software Association forecast a $30 billion year globally in 2015. What the heck is going on here? Things are very volatile, it seems. Well, we've seen a very volatile thing in social games. And we're seeing it in mobile games, too. We're going to talk about that today. What are social games? They are games that allow players to interact with each other socially. It is the humans that are interacting in social games. Baseball would be a social game because humans interact. Car Town on Facebook would also be a social game because I had extra pizza left and could drop it off to one of my friends on my way doing my pizza deliveries. Social games. Chess would be a social game because I am interacting with other players. The card game Bridge, a big example of a social game. Massively multiplayer online role-playing game like World of Warcraft is a social game, though the players are represented by avatars of themselves and may not know the identity of the actual human with which you are interacting. Another massive online first-person shooter, Star Wars Battlefront 2. This is not necessarily a role-playing game because you don't do much role-playing other than blasting or cutting with your lightsaber, attacking and defending. It's mostly a shooter game. You don't develop much of a personality or character in Star Wars Battlefront 2 or any of the Battlefront games as it soldiers on. Okay, multiplayer asymmetrical mobile co-op game like Space Team is a social game. It takes 2 to 4 people with mobile devices on the same network to play this amazingly fun game. Multiplayer asymmetrical location-based entertainment, LBE, you may not have heard of. Location-based entertainment is a type of game. And Artemis Starship Bridge Simulator, where your crew flies a spaceship and blasts enemies, is definitely, unquestionably, a social game. That's a picture of me and my friends playing on my Starship Bridge. All right, a multiplayer asymmetrical virtual reality game we mentioned a couple of weeks ago. Keep Talking and Nobody Explodes for the Oculus Rift. Quite a social game where one player wears the Oculus Rift and other players have code books where they look up information so that the player wearing the Oculus Rift can disarm bombs and keep everyone from exploding. That turned out to be a really fun game, and you only need one Oculus Rift for a whole bunch of players, but you also need a lot of paper. Let's talk about casual social games, though. That seemed to be something big, and it's been a multi-million-dollar issue for a few years. Casual social games have simple rules, require very low skill, and are low-commitment games. And they are casual most of all. A formal game, like baseball, is rigidly organized and timed, and people have to show up and have certain behaviors at certain times. A casual social game, like Car Town, you log in anytime, you do kind of whatever you want to do in your world of Car Town, anytime you want, and you interact with your friends. Low commitment to that game. Casual social gaming. So, PopCap, a company you've probably all heard of, and you may, if you haven't already played their games, you will by the end of this term have played some PopCap games. They commissioned a study by Information Solutions Group in 2010 to look at who plays social games and when do they play, why do they play. And so they surveyed 1,202 people in the United States and United Kingdom, and they answered 41 questions. And they published their study to the world for free. And they discovered things about the social gaming phenomenon that really surprised everybody. We're looking now at the age of social gamers. The age of most college students is here, 18 to 21, under 18, 18 to 21 there. Here we have the 22 to 29. The age of most of the people playing social games were up here. Huge numbers of people, 30 to 39, 40 to 49, and 50 to 59. Even the 60 plus dwarfed the 18 to 21s. And it's about the same as all of 0 to 29 put together. Wow, this tapped into a whole new audience that other computer games hadn't. No wonder it made so much money. Gender of social gamers. It turned out 45% male, 55% female. Also tapping into a whole new audience of gamers. More about what we found out. Most of the social gamers have full-time jobs. Most have played for over a year, and that was as of 2010. Only 6% were students, high school, college, postgraduate students, whatever kind of students. 57% had not graduated from college in the US, though most had full-time jobs. And 28%, and this is important, 28% have spent real-world currency for game currency. Purchases within the game. And so the reasons for social gaming they gave, I like the fun and excitement was number 1. It's a stress reliever was number 2. Enjoyed the competitive spirit was number 3. Mental workout, expressing my personality. There was nothing in there about victory and glory or anything like that in their most cited reasons for playing. And this study is available. There's a link to it online, so don't worry about whether you can read everything on these graphs or not. You'll be able to read them online. This is very important to us as a society. Activities that social gamers have reduced. Number 1, reading books, magazines, and newspapers. They have reduced that. Bad news for the publishing industry. Bad news for those who are aspiring novelists or even graphic novelists. Great news for those who are aspiring game developers. And we'll talk more about genres later on in the course. They've cut down on watching television and movies, and they've cut down on general surfing of the internet in order to play these games. They didn't cut down on cooking and shopping so much. What was that? Yeah. All right, social games that were played at least once a week. Farmville was #1 back in 2010, and it went down from there. Texas Hold'em was one of the popular ones. So let's talk about that internet gaming success story of 2010, Farmville. That was kind of an amazing story. The Farmville story, building that game took Zynga 5 weeks. They had a team of 15 to 20 people to make that game. It cost them an estimated $100,000 to $300,000 to develop Farmville. If you think about your Kickstarters for making games, that's totally reasonable. And this came from a Gama Sutra article that you can find in February 2010. Let's talk about the history of Farmville. It was launched on June 19th of 2009. In 9 weeks, it drew 11 million players through Facebook, mostly through Facebook. Let's talk about the spread of Farmville. Facebook subscribers with friends got nonstop notifications. They were messages from their friends. These weren't advertisements. You'd get these little notifications that my friend wanted to share a perfect bunch of golden poppies with me in Farmville. Even non-players got them. I wasn't a player when I started getting these messages. Since they were coming from real friends, they seemed more attractive than just advertisements. So let's talk about the game mechanics of Farmville. You would harvest, plant, and plow by clicking on squares on a grid. And well, it was a very successful game, and a couple of years ago, Zynga wanted to see if they could keep up that pace. So they created Cityville. They discovered that players tired of grinding. That's what Farmville was grinding. Everything you did in Farmville was grinding, and then waiting a couple hours and hurrying back to your computer to grind some more. But players tired of that. Zynga learned from Farmville and honed in the game mechanics for their next game, well, their next big sequel, Cityville. They used Farmville to make Cityville grow even faster than Farmville had grown. They used something called Metcalfe's Law. The value of a network is proportional to the square of the number of connections. So if you double the number of connections, it's 4 times as valuable a network. And so the more connections you've got, the more valuable that network is. They started off Farmville with nothing, but when they started Cityville, they already had this enormous Farmville network where people were already hooked into each other. All they had to do was get them to spread the word about Cityville to their friends via Facebook, and it exploded. It was launched in early December of 2010. By January 20th, 2011, it had achieved 101 million monthly active users. MAU is an important metric in the business of online games. And 20,381,116 daily active users. 20 million every day. And that the source for that is app data. There's a link in the class for you to see that data. All right, how does that add up for Cityville? Well, 28%, remember we said 28% of the players of social games were willing to spend real-world money in games. So I'm doing a hypothetical here based on all this information we know, because they didn't publish what their profits were. But if you have 28% of 20 million daily users, that's 5.6 million users per day who are willing to spend real cash every single day. If they spent 1 penny each, that's $560,000 every day that game would be making, just by attracting these people to click on their little cities and things. So let's talk about the game mechanics of Cityville, which was somewhat more entertaining than Farmville. You'd get experience points for growing crops, renting out your businesses. You'd get energy for doing various things. You could harvest things. You had lots of things to click on. Your businesses and farms and things would produce stuff for you to click on. And if you got more energy, you could spend more time clicking on things in the game. You could collect rent from all the businesses you had. You'd get money. You'd get experience points. And then you could ask your friends for help. You could give help to your friends. And keep going on and on and on. And it would say nice things to you. Had all the cute graphics and cute faces and happiness going on. It was a very, very fun game compared to Farmville. There were multiple in-game currencies and lots of other resources for you to manage. It was much more complicated than Farmville. I guess is more complicated. I think it's still going on. And there were lots of sub-goals. That was important. That was something they learned. You had lots of sub-goals to achieve. But in this, see, they would give you sets of goals every day you could achieve. There was no final goal. They wanted to make sure you knew you could play this game forever. And there would always be more and more goals for you to achieve and more cool things for you to buy to show your friends. All right, social interaction was, however, required for success in Farmville. It was not a game you could just play on your own. Like all of these games, you had to interact with your fellow humans out there on the internet, in this case, through Facebook. You could get your friends to help you collect, help you harvest, to guide your ships, to send tourist buses to your city, things like that. And game mechanics of social games on Facebook in general, you could give gifts to your friends. They were free to you, but it gave them something they couldn't get themselves. They would in turn give gifts back to you. You could brag about your victories on Facebook, as I'm doing here in the social game Movie Pop. You could challenge your friends in games like Song Pop and Movie Pop. Let's look at some of the ideas behind Farmville and Cityville. Zynga founder Mark Pincus was interviewed on CNN. He said he wanted to create simple games that people like but could easily set aside. He said, we built the games so they could be played in the tab of your browser while you're on a conference call. He set out to fill a surprising void in most people's daily internet use. He thought back in 2007 that something had gone oddly wrong with the whole internet experience. He would have thought games would have been one of the top 2 or 3 experiences people had on the internet. But they weren't at the time. And so Brian Reynolds, the chief game designer at Zynga, said you have to get the social right in order to get anything else. Improve your social mechanics, then add the fun into your bucket. And you see that with the development of Cityville out of Farmville. How they got the social right first, and then they added the fun. And Ryan Reynolds said, we make the link between virtual goods and real-world social relationships. If you don't understand that, you're not going to succeed in social games, he said. And that is how they got people to make purchases, in-game purchases, using real currency. All right, now let's talk about an article that you're going to read, The Sunk Cost Fallacy, and another article you're going to read is Teague Kelly's Engagement. First, we'll talk about David McRaney's Sunk Cost Fallacy. The more you invest in something, the harder it is to let it go. And that was the key to what made Farmville work. Turns out these games make it easy to invest in a quick return for the future. And then you do it again and again. So, you would buy crops in Farmville and they would start growing. You would have to come back to harvest them at a certain time or they'd wither. So you'd log on regularly and you'd get more currency to buy more crops and more land and expand and get bigger. And you'd come back more and more often. The more you had invested, the more you felt like you had to come back. You fell in love with your farm. You didn't want to let it wither. And so you'd get up at 3 o'clock in the morning to harvest those pumpkins or corn or whatever crop it was, and do it again and again and again. Now let's talk about Teague Kelly's engagement hierarchy. Talked about distraction, amusement, connection, meaning, and culture as the hierarchy. Distraction, you've probably seen a message like this before. Tomorrow, Facebook will change its privacy settings to allow Mark Zuckerberg to come into your house while you are asleep and eat your brains with a sharpened spoon. To stop this from happening, go to Accounts, Home Invasion Settings, Cannibalism Brains, and uncheck the Tasty box. You've probably seen messages like that coming across various social media. It's a funny thing, a distraction. That's it. It's come and it's gone in your life. Let's talk about amusement, a much more casual game like a Tetris kind of game or a Bejeweled Blitz kind of game. The game takes a very short amount of time. Bejeweled Blitz, 1 minute. Tetris can go significantly longer than that. But it's just an amusement to solve this little puzzle and then it's done. In the engagement hierarchy, the next thing is a connection where it's not just momentary attention, but you have a lasting relationship with the game or the world. If you are a bridge player, it takes a lot of your brain cells to learn to play this game and you become invested in it. If you're playing Star Wars Battlefront 2, you will develop some skills, any of the Battlefront games, and you will have an investment in it, and there will be lingo involved with either of these games that you learn, and you will become part of that world. And then we talk about meaning, where there's a special significance to the player. There's this internal desire to master the game. Golf could be an example. Darksiders could be an example where you have a character that has some meaning to you, and you care about what happens, and you care about the outcome, and you want to get better and better and master it. And then there's culture, where the game becomes part of the culture and a common topic of conversation. Baseball would be such a game. Football, basketball, any of the major sports. A lot of the terminology from these games is part of our lingo in life. I would think that Halo also is at that level, where it is part of the culture. And you can use terms from Halo and people will understand what you're talking about in regular conversation. Most casual social games, however, can never get above the level of amusement. And so being first is important. That's why all the Farmville copiers failed, or most of them failed, because there was already a Farmville. And since it wasn't going to engage people at a higher level than amusement, nobody wanted to play 2 Farmvilles. And that's how they leveraged that into Cityville. And Cartown became the first of its kind, I believe. And Railroad Empire, I don't know exactly if it's the first of its kind. But let's talk about the activities social gamers have reduced. Remember, reading a book, watching TVs, movies at home was significant to us. We pulled people away from things that took a lot more attention and investment to do things that took less attention and less investment in this hierarchy. All right, the same social game mechanics are used in the social mobile games like Scrabble or Words with Friends or Draw Something. I wonder if Draw Something is a co-op game or a competitive game. Anybody play Draw Something? It's kind of a strange game. You can't, if you lose that game, both players lose. So you want to, both players want each other to succeed constantly. Social game developer Supercell last year had this straight-to-tablet strategy with this Clash of Clans game that's pretty big out there in social media right now. And you see a lot of advertisements of that. And once again, PopCap commissioned another study in 2013 to study mobile gaming. We're not going to take the time to go over all of their study today. Again, they went to Information Solutions Group for the information, and they surveyed almost the same number of people, 1,008 responses from US consumers with mobile devices. And look what they discovered on mobile gaming. It was growing by leaps and bounds in the female category. By 2013, there were more females playing mobile games than there were males playing mobile games. That seemed to be the growth area. Again, it was reaching an untapped audience. And another interesting thing they found out that's relevant to the people in this class, last thing we're going to cover today, and I have a typo on this slide. Types of games played. When you categorize them as free-to-play games or paid games, 63% played nothing but free-to-play games. 2% played nothing but pay-to-play games. And 35% were playing free-to-play games but willing to play pay-to-play games. They played some pay-to-play games. Very interesting for those of us who want to sell mobile games. Okay, there's more to talk about from this study, but we're kind of out of time. So we'll continue this conversation in the online discussions in this class. In the meantime, next time we're going to talk about play testing of games. And until next time, this is Mike Substelny signing off for Intro to Computer Games and Simulations here at Lorain County Community College.